My name is Caleb Foster. I am 32 years old. And tonight, I read my parents' will and learned everything: house, land, Dad's 57 Bel Air. Mom's jewelry goes to my cousin Blake, the real son. Hours earlier, they'd toasted him with a slideshow that turned me into a joke: granny photos, a college breakdown, laughter scraping like forks on china. Back home, I opened my banking portal and felt my stomach drop. Years of mortgage payments, and even Blake's wedding bills had been drafted from an account with my name on it. The room went very quiet in my head. But what they didn't know was I keep receipts. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. My name is Caleb Foster. And if you really want to understand how I ended up staring at a will that erased me from my own family, you have to go back years before that night. You have to step into my childhood kitchen, smell the overcooked pot roast, hear the TV blaring some rerun of Wheel of Fortune while my father barked about keeping our voices down. Because the truth is, the betrayal didn't start with a lawyer's pen. It started at 1,000 little dinners, 1,000 little birthdays, 1,000 little moments where I learned exactly where I stood. I was 8 years old the first time I realized I wasn't the favorite. It was my birthday, a sticky summer evening in July. We sat around the chipped oak table in the dining room. Balloons sagged against the ceiling, drooping from the heat. My mom placed a square package in front of me. I tore the paper carefully, wanting to savor the moment, and found a plain blue sweater folded inside. No tag, no wrapping tissue, just a sweater. Be grateful, she said quickly. Before I could react, it's practical. You'll wear it all winter. But then came Blake's birthday a month later. He was my cousin, but might as well have been royalty in that house. His party was loud, extravagant, a rented clown in the yard, a mountain of gifts stacked on the coffee table. When he opened a brand new video game console, Mom actually clapped. See, Caleb, that's what happens when you set an example like Blake does. I laughed along, my sweater scratchy on my skin even though it was still summer. I didn't know it then, but that would matter later. Middle school wasn't much different. I remember standing on the soccer field, sweaty, my heart hammering after scoring a goal. For a rare second, I felt noticed. Riley, my younger sister, cheered from the sideline. But when the game ended and families crowded onto the field, Mom brushed right past me. She threw her arms around Blake, who had played for the other team. You were incredible out there, she beamed. Dad ruffled Blake's hair, ignoring the mud streaked across my uniform. You'll make the family proud one day. I swallowed my words and told myself maybe next time. There was always supposed to be a next time. High school carved the lesson deeper. I studied late, worked hard, won a local science fair project on renewable energy. A big deal for me. My project was displayed in the school gym. Sunlight pouring through the windows, the air heavy with the smell of gym mats. Parents came by to take pictures. Mine came too. But when the newspaper photographer asked for a family shot, Dad shook his head. Better get one with Blake in it. He mentored Caleb through the project. That wasn't true. Blake hadn't touched a single diagram. But the picture ran in the paper with the caption, Blake Turner, guiding influence. I stood just at the edge, smiling stiffly, my project poster cropped halfway out. I told myself college would be different. I paid my own way through, working shifts at a grocery store and tutoring calculus on the side. When I graduated, I walked across the stage, tassels swinging, the stadium buzzing with applause. Afterward, I found my parents in the crowd. Mom hugged me, quick and distracted. Oh, that's nice, Caleb, she said, then turned to Riley. We need to head back soon. Blake's stopping by tonight. I stood there in my cap and gown, holding a diploma that already felt weightless. Money became the unspoken chain between us. When Dad got laid off during a market crash, I was the one with a stable paycheck. Quietly, I started transferring money to cover the mortgage, utilities, little extras like mom's wine of the month subscription. At first, it felt right. They were my parents. Family helps family. But then something shifted. The gratitude never came. Instead, expectations hardened into commands. Transfer today. Don't let the gas get shut off. Always clipped. Never thank you. And yet, I complied. Month after month, I funneled my earnings into a house that wasn't even mine. When Blake got married, I thought maybe things would even out. I thought maybe my contributions would finally be visible. Instead, I was blindsided. At the reception, held in some grand ballroom lit by chandeliers, I was seated next to the restroom doors. My plate was replaced with chicken fingers meant for the kids' table because apparently they ran out of entrees. I smiled through it. My stomach nodded. Then came the slideshow. It was supposed to be a montage of Blake's life, his accomplishments, his milestones, but threaded between were pictures of me awkward, pimply teenage shots, a clip of me crying when my car broke down in college, even a blurry photo of me asleep on a couch with my mouth open. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Maya, a colleague of mine, later whispered, "They really put that in there." And just like that, humiliation didn't stay in the family. It followed me to work. What I didn't realize that night was how deep the betrayal went. Months later, when I stopped covering bills out of sheer exhaustion, the truth came out. At the bank, Mr. Whitaker printed out a stack of statements for me. I flipped through page after page. My pulse racing. Venue deposit. Florist. Live band. Even the slideshow service. All of it had been pulled from an account with my name attached. I had been paying for my own public humiliation. I sat in my kitchen that night. Papers spread out like battle plans. The faint hum of the fridge, the only sound. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from clarity. Every sacrifice, every quiet payment, every birthday sweater, every ignored achievement, it all lined up in black and white. I wasn't just overlooked. I was used. And the refrain echoed back in my head. Sharp as glass. Be grateful. I didn't know it then. But that phrase, that sweater, that slideshow, they weren't just memories. They were the receipts of a debt my family didn't realize I was finally ready to collect. By the time I hit my late 20s, I thought maybe adulthood would soften the edges. I had a decent job in financial operations, a modest apartment, enough stability to breathe. Riley, my younger sister, would sometimes check in. She was timid, conflict avoidant, the kind of person who tried to crack jokes just to ease tension. "At least you're the responsible one," she'd say with a nervous laugh. But responsibility without respect is just another word for servitude. Holidays remained brutal reminders. Thanksgiving at the Foster house was a circus of expectation. Mom would glide around the kitchen, apron spotless, voice sharp, as she directed Riley to set the table properly because Blake was coming. I'd carve the turkey, sweating under the kitchen lights, only to hear Dad boom from the living room. "Blake, come carve. Show us how it's done." And just like that, I'd be demoted to dish duty while Blake soaked up applause. I'd stand at the sink, the smell of dish soap thick in my nose, turkey grease clinging to my skin, and hear their laughter echo from the dining room. Christmas was no better. One year, I saved up to buy my parents a smart TV. I pictured their faces lighting up as they unwrapped it. Instead, Mom tore the paper, smiled briefly, and set it aside. When Blake handed them a fruit basket and a bottle of champagne, she practically squealed. "He always knows exactly what we need," she gushed. I stood there holding a stray ribbon, the TV remote heavy in my hand, like I'd just made a meaningless gesture. Even vacations had their hierarchy. We went to Myrtle Beach one summer, The photo albums afterward told the story. Page after page of Blake on jet skis. Blake at the bonfire. Blake smiling with sunburned cheeks. I was barely there. Usually behind the camera. Holding the sunscreen. Or lugging the cooler. In one group shot. I was half cut off. My arm dangling like I was photobombing my own family. When I pointed it out, Dad chuckled. At least you got in the frame. Not everyone can say that. I laughed with him, though something inside me shriveled. There was one memory that cut deeper than most. Dad's old Chevy Bel Air. A 1957 classic he swore would be passed down someday. He used to polish it in the garage. Radio humming low. The scent of motor oil and metal filling the air. I'd hand him tools. Eager just to be part of it. One night, after I spent hours helping him reinstall the carburetor, he patted Blake on the back. Couldn't have done it without you. Son. Blake hadn't even been there. I froze. Wrench in hand. Grease smeared across my fingers. That moment burned into me, like acid. College years had their own humiliations. When I got my first internship in the city, I drove home bursting with excitement. I pictured a proud dinner. Maybe even a toast. Instead, Mom barely looked up from the stove. That's nice, she said flatly. But Blake just landed a job offer at a tech firm. He might be a millionaire before 30. Dad grinned. That's the kind of ambition we need in this family. I forced a smile. My news swallowed whole by their obsession with him. Even Riley wasn't immune to the comparison game. At her graduation, Blake sat in the front row, clapping louder than anyone. Later, when family photos were taken, Mom pulled him in tight, declaring, "You're such a role model for Riley." I was standing right there, tie crooked, diploma in hand, invisible in plain sight. Riley gave me a small shrug, a silent apology. I swallowed it like always. The refrain grew louder over the years. If you were more like Blake, sometimes whispered, sometimes said in front of friends, sometimes written in birthday cards, disguised as advice. Each time, it carved a little deeper, until my self-worth became a ledger of debts and credits that never balanced. And then came the financial favor. It was early winter. The house was at risk of foreclosure after Dad missed too many payments. Mom called me at work. Her voice sugary sweet. Just a small thing. Caleb, sign here so the bank has a backup payer. It's temporary. I signed, thinking I was protecting them. Months later, I realized I'd tethered myself to every expense tied to that house. Mortgage, utilities, even Blake's wedding. My signature was the key. I can still picture the night I discovered the truth. Sitting in my apartment, laptop open, bank statements glowing under the dim kitchen light. Each line item was a knife venue deposit. Bamayan, Wu Bai, florist, Armayan, Lianbei, band, Simayan, Liningling, slideshow service, Lu Baimayan, all withdrawn from the joint account with my name on it. I pressed my palm against my forehead, bile rising in my throat. I had funded not just their house, but Blake's spectacle. I had paid for my own erasure. In that moment, memories began lining up like witnesses in a trial. The sweater at 8. The crop photo at 16. The TV gift dismissed. The Chevy Bel Air credit stolen. The joint account signature. All of it suddenly made sense. It wasn't random slights, it was a system. A system designed to keep me paying. Keep me quiet. Keep me grateful. But what they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that the system had a flaw. And I was trained to find flaws. My job was literally to trace numbers, hunt irregularities, expose weaknesses. They thought I was harmless because I kept my head down, because I didn't raise my voice. But my silence had always been an audit. My patience, a record-keeping exercise. And one day, Those records would speak louder than I ever could. I didn't know when it would happen. I didn't know how. But as I sat there that night with papers spread across my kitchen table, the fridge humming like a metronome, I felt something shift. For years, they called Blake their real son. For years, they told me to be grateful. For years, I had believed them. But now I saw it clearly. Gratitude is not the same as respect. And respect is not handed out like sweaters on birthdays. It's earned or taken back. That was the background. That was the soil in which betrayal took root. And when the will finally surfaced, leaving everything to Blake, it wasn't the beginning. It was the inevitable harvest. The first real fracture came a week after I stopped sending money. It was a Tuesday morning. Gray skies hanging low outside my apartment window. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping burnt coffee from the office machine I'd borrowed years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. No greeting. No, how are you? No sign of affection. Just transfer the mortgage today. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. For years, I'd jumped at messages like that, rushing to log in before the due date passed. But that morning, I didn't. I slid the phone face down on the table and listened to the silence. By the end of the day, there were 3 missed calls and 2 voicemails. The first was brisk. Caleb, call me back. The mortgage is due. The second had an edge. Why haven't you paid yet? Don't make this difficult. Do what's best for the family. By the third, she was practically spitting through the receiver. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this stops now. Don't embarrass us. Once, those words would have cut me in half. Now, they just clarified something I'd been avoiding. I wasn't a son. I was a service. The weekend brought Blake into town. Against my better judgment, I went to dinner. Part of me hoped the tension would ease if we all sat at the same table. Instead, the night was another performance of the Blake Foster show. He lounged on the couch like a king while Mom perched at his side, glowing as he told stories of his promotion. They finally made me team lead, he said, smirking. Big raise. 2. Mom clasped his hand. We're so proud of you. She'd never used that tone with me. Not once. When I mentioned landing a new client at work, Dad cut me off mid-sentence. Did you tell them about your bonus? Blake dinner itself was another lesson in humiliation. Every time I opened my mouth, someone cut me off. At one point, Mom handed me her wine glass. Top me up. Would you? You're closer. I poured in silence, my jaw tight. Later, she turned to me casually. Oh, the electric bill came in. I paid it this time, but you'll need to reimburse me. She said it like she was scolding a child who forgot his chores. I felt Blake watching me, his smirk widening. Yeah, man, he said. Don't leave them hanging. I wanted to slam the glass down, to shout. Instead, I looked at him, and for just a second, his grin faltered. Something in my face must have changed, because the room grew quieter. Dad crossed his arms. You've been cold lately. Your mother's worried. I almost laughed. Worried, not about me. About the bills. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said, my voice steady. This isn't about family. It's about keeping Blake's inheritance tidy. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. I left without dessert, coat thrown over my shoulder, their stunned faces burning into my back. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I replayed every detail. Mom's narrowed eyes, Blake's smirk, Dad's folded arms. They weren't confused by my withdrawal, they were offended. How dare the ATM stop working? The more I thought about it, the more a cold calm settled in. I wasn't powerless. I had records. Years of transfers. Every receipt saved in neat folders. I wasn't sure yet how I'd use them, but I knew the day would come. The next blow came wrapped in sugar. A week later, Mom called sounding uncharacteristically sweet. Why don't you come by Sunday? Just a small dinner. Roast chicken, your favorite. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I walked into the dining room that night to see a giant cake on the table. Congratulations. Blake blue frosting looped across the top. My stomach dropped. What's this? I asked. Mom's smile tightened. Oh, just celebrating Blake's promotion properly. Isn't it wonderful it wasn't dinner? It was a party. The night was one long toast to Blake's brilliance. Every conversation looped back to him. Every laugh at his jokes a reminder of my invisibility. But the real betrayal came at dessert. Dad stood, glass raised. We've decided it's time to make things official. Blake's taking over all financial responsibilities for the house. Effective immediately. Applause filled the room. Mom beamed, her hand on his shoulder. He's already set up automatic payments. Such a relief. Relief? That's what she called it after years of me carrying the weight in silence. Blake raised his glass, smirking. To family. And to keeping this place in good hands. The table clinked glasses. I didn't move. Mom's smile faltered. Don't be rude. Caleb, this is a happy occasion. My chair scraped loudly as I stood. Happy for who? The room froze. Dad's warning tone cut through. Sit down. But I didn't. I looked around at their faces and realized something they weren't ashamed. They were proud of replacing me. I left without another word. The cold night air slapped me awake as I walked to my car. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I was resolved. Their performance had handed me something precious: clarity. I wasn't a son in their eyes. I was an obstacle they'd finally removed. But they'd forgotten something. Obstacles can trip you up when you least expect it. After that night, silence stretched like a wire between us. I didn't call. I didn't text. I let the mortgage notices pile up in their mailbox. Let the utilities send their polite reminders. Then came the messages again. Sharper this time. Mom's text. Do you want this house to go into default? Minutes later. Another. If you can't handle this, maybe Blake should take over completely. He's always been more responsible anyway. That word responsible hit like a slap. I stared at the screen until my coffee went cold. For a moment, guilt almost pulled me back. Old habits. Years of training. But then I remembered the cake. The applause. Mom's hand on Blake's shoulder, like he was her chosen son. And the guilt vanished. Replaced by something harder. They wanted me erased from the ledger. And I was ready to let them think they had succeeded. What they didn't know was that the ledger was my territory. The humiliation spread beyond the house. A few days later at work, Maya, a colleague I trusted, leaned over at lunch. Hey, someone sent me a video from your family thing. My chest tightened. She slid her phone across the table. It was a slideshow, projected in the Foster dining room. Photos of me mid-blink, spilling food on a shirt. Even a grainy clip from college when I'd had a breakdown after finals. Laughter echoed in the background. I could hear Blake's voice narrating. Maya bit her lip. I didn't want to show you. But people have been passing it around. My stomach burned. Years of professionalism. Undone by a cheap slideshow funded with money that wasn't even theirs. That night, I dug through old files. Bank statements. Payment receipts. Transfers neatly cataloged. Hours blurred as I flipped through page after page. That's when I saw it, not just mortgage payments, but charges from wedding vendors, a florist, a catering hall, even an invoice from a video production company, the slideshow itself. All of it debited from a joint account with my name on it. My throat tightened. I had literally paid for my own humiliation. I pressed my palms into the table, breathing through the rising nausea. My mind replayed every casual request from Mom over the years. Just sign this. Honey, it's easier for the bank. I had signed. Obedient. Thinking it was temporary. Now, the paper trail told a different story. I wasn't just the forgotten son, I'd been their financial crutch, the invisible line item in their balance sheet. The following week, I went to the bank. Mr. Whitaker, a clerk I'd seen a dozen times, ushered me into a small office that smelled faintly of toner. He pulled up my account, brows furrowing. These withdrawals are all tied to your authorization. He turned the screen toward me. Rows of transactions highlighted. Venue. Florist. Band. His voice trailed off. I nodded slowly. So technically, I paid for all of it. He hesitated, then nodded back. Yes, you did. That confirmation was both devastating and electrifying. Devastating because the betrayal was complete. Electrifying because now I had proof. Not just suspicion. Not just bitterness documents. Signatures. Dates. Evidence. The blows kept landing. Through a quiet contact, I learned the will had been filed at probate the same week. I stopped sending money. Rushed. Almost panicked. Ms. Carver, the clerk, showed me the timestamp. It didn't match. The notary's seal was dated outside office hours. An irregularity big enough to raise questions. And in the garage, under a dusty tarp, I found Dad's prized Chevy Bel Air. Registration papers still in the old owner's name. So much for free and clear. Their empire wasn't just built on my back, it was sloppy. Each discovery sharpened the edge inside me. Mom's sticky notes promising, if you behave, we can adjust some things. A voicemail overheard by Ms. Delgado next door, Linda calling Blake our real son. These weren't just slights. They were patterns. Proof of intent. I kept my face neutral whenever I saw them. Riley, my sister, texted me once. You okay? Things feel tense. I typed and erased a dozen replies before settling on. I'm fine. Don't worry. She never pressed. She'd learned the same lesson I had. Silence kept the peace. But peace was over. The fractures had widened into a canyon. They thought they'd finally stripped me of leverage. That I'd fade quietly into the background while Blake wore the crown. What they didn't see was the binder forming on my kitchen table. Tabbed and color-coded. Every page, another nail in the coffin of their illusion. The escalation wasn't loud. It was quiet. Steady. Like water wearing down stone. Every voicemail saved. Every bank statement printed. Every irregularity circled in red. By the time spring thawed the city, I wasn't just their forgotten son anymore. I was their creditor. Their auditor. And soon their reckoning. The spring evening carried that faint chill that always lingered even after the sun dipped behind the trees. The Foster dining room glowed in a warm amber light. Glasses clinked. Silver scraped against plates. And the low hum of voices floated under the chandelier. At first glance, it could have been any ordinary family dinner. But I had walked into that house with a binder in my hand and a steel line running down my spine. Mom smiled too brightly when she saw me. Caleb, glad you could make it. We were just talking about Blake's new project at work. Blake leaned back in his chair, grinning, like he already knew how the night would go. Dad poured himself another glass of wine and said, "Let's toast to new beginnings." That phrase hit me harder than the wine fumes hanging in the air. New beginnings meant something specific in this house: Blake's promotion, Blake's inheritance, Blake's throne. I pulled the binder from under my arm and set it down on the table with a dull thud. The sound silenced the room. Blake chuckled. "What's this? Your homework?" I met his smirk with a level gaze. "No, this is everything you've ignored. Every line item you've pretended didn't exist." I flipped open the first tab. The pages rustled sharp in the quiet room. Bank statements. I read dates and amounts. My voice steady. Detached mortgage payments. Utilities. Checks to vendors for Blake's wedding. Even the invoice for the slideshow that humiliated me in front of half the family. All withdrawn from an account bearing my name. I said flatly, "Over $140. 0 inches total contributions. Blake's grin faltered. Mom shifted in her seat, her hands tightening around her wine glass. Dad leaned forward, brows furrowed. But he didn't speak. Tab 2. I slid the probate filings across the table. Submitted within 48 hours of me halting payments. Witness signatures that don't line up. A notarization outside business hours. Ask Notary Lutz about that if you'd like. My tone was cold, but I could see color draining from Mom's face. Blake scoffed. You think you can undo a will with a few dates and stamps? I didn't even look at him. Page 3. He flipped it and froze. Title documents for Dad's Chevy Bel Air. The one he always bragged was part of the estate. Insurance records showed the vehicle still in both Thomas Foster's and my name. Never properly updated. Not free and clear. I said quietly, meaning the estate wasn't what the will claimed. The air felt thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. Dad muttered, "This is nonsense." Tab 4. I pulled out the letter drafted by Elise, my attorney. The paper caught the light as I placed it in the center. Demand for repayment of all contributions. With interest. 30 days. In writing. Or I file claims in probate court, including constructive trust and reimbursement petition. That's not a threat. That's procedure. Mom's voice cracked as she whispered, "Caleb, don't embarrass us like this." I turned to her. Calm as stone. Respect isn't a scene. It's a ledger. Blake slammed his hand on the table. You're bluffing. You wouldn't drag your own family into court. From the end of the table, Riley finally spoke. Her voice quiet but firm. Let him finish. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Dad's jaw worked, but no words came. Ron shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For once without a story to spin, I slid the final tab closed. The binder now neat again. Like nothing had happened. 30 days. I repeated. If not, I'll see you in probate. Blake opened his mouth to retort, but his voice cracked. Mom reached out. Maybe for me. Maybe for the binder. But I stood, straightening my cuffs with deliberate care. Dinner's over. No one stopped me as I walked out. Behind me, chairs scraped. Glasses clinked nervously. Whispers rushed. But the only sound I carried with me was the steady rhythm of my own breath. Cold. Certain. For years, I had been the invisible son. The quiet wallet. The one who sat at the edge of the table. But that night, I left the house not as their afterthought, but as the man who had turned their own paper trail into a weapon. And for the first time, they knew it too. I didn't storm out that night after the dinner. I didn't slam doors or shout. I simply gathered my binder, slid the last tab back into place, and closed it with a click that sounded louder than anything anyone had said all evening. No one moved. Not Blake with his smirk wilted into silence. Not my father with his arms folded tighter across his chest. Not my mother, with her lips trembling, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find words that wouldn't incriminate her. Even Riley, usually quiet, just stared at me like she was seeing her brother for the first time. I pushed my chair back, smoothed my cuffs, and stood. My voice didn't rise. It was steady, measured, final. 30 days. In writing. Or I file. Then I walked out, leaving their heavy silence behind me. Back in my apartment, I spread the binder across the kitchen table like it was a war map. The documents weren't just proof anymore. They were leverage. A shield and a weapon at the same time. Each page represented a payment, a text, a voicemail, a note I'd quietly filed away. For years they'd seen me as the invisible accountant who kept the lights on. They didn't realize that being invisible meant I had the perfect view of every transaction, every misstep, every little piece of paper they'd signed without reading. And now, those scraps of paper were my arsenal. I thought of my mother's sticky note, the one that said, "If you behave, We can adjust some things. I thought of Ms. Delgado overhearing that voicemail. My mother calling Blake their real son. I thought of Notary Lutz's sloppy timestamp. Of Ms. Carver's raised eyebrow when she showed me the probate filing date. Of the insurance forms tucked in the garage next to the Bel Air. They had built their fortress on paperwork, on process, on reputation. And they'd forgotten that was my world. Numbers, timelines, rules. I didn't need to outshout them. I just needed to outlast them with facts. As I slid the binder back into its case, I caught my reflection in the darkened kitchen window, calm, collected. But there was something new in my eyes. A cold edge that hadn't been there before. They thought cutting me out of the will ended my part in the story. What they didn't know was that they just handed me the perfect angle to rewrite it. And I wasn't done yet. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you know how deep the silence can cut. But silence doesn't have to mean defeat, it can mean strategy, patience, and the power to strike at the right moment. My story isn't over, and neither is yours. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or told you were less than, I want you here with me. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And stay tuned because the next chapter is already waiting. My name is Margaret Maggie Sloan. I'm 68 years old. And this morning I watched $450,000 vanish from my company's operating account. While my kettle screamed on the stove, the numbers bled to zero. Then my phone lit up, thanks for the house and the car. Mom. A winking smile I never taught my daughter to use. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and fear. My hand steadied, and something in me snapped into place. Clean and cold. Everyone expected me to beg, to hush it up, to play small. But what they didn't know was, before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Drop a comment with the city on your mind tonight. Because places hold memories. And memories shape the choices we make. Your stories keep this channel alive. And what I'm about to share might help someone you love before it's too late. I didn't begin with trucks or a title. I began with a broom and a night key that stuck in locks. Downtown Denver after midnight has elevator dings, HVAC hum, wheels squeaking. On breaks I wrote numbers in a spiral notebook. 50 for a night class. 80 for a rust brown pickup that coughed. Numbers never pitied me. A social worker introduced me to a little girl who didn't speak. Ava held a stuffed rabbit, one ear sewn back with blue thread. She sat too small in a plastic chair and watched a sealed window like she could bargain with glass. When she finally whispered, it wasn't a question so much as a check against disaster. Is the window locked? Today it is. I said, when the sun comes back, we'll open it. I didn't know locks and codes would rule us later. I carried her home like weather could blow her out of my arms. My house smelled of pine cleaner and dish soap because I'd scrubbed everything. I turned the couch into a bed because the real one looked like a cliff. She watched me boil pasta, eyes widening at the kettle's scream until I clicked it off. My mother called the kettle a poor woman's church bell. I paid attention to everything. Ava's storms were quiet. She didn't throw or kick. She went still when car doors slammed. At 2 a.m., I'd open my eyes to find her silhouette in the doorway. Rabbit limp. Hair, a small storm. Come here, baby. I'd whisper. She'd crawl under the quilt and press her face into my shoulder as if smell alone could anchor her. Green apple shampoo and playground dust. People define poverty with numbers. Those nights taught me another measure. I took accounting at the community college, copying debits and credits until my hand cramped. Balance the scale, keep the lights on. I bought a truck the color of old coffee. The torn vinyl seat pinched my thigh until I learned the angle that didn't draw blood. My first contract was printer paper. Heavy. The yard smelled like diesel and wet cardboard. Ava climbed into the passenger seat and traced the split seam. Can I honk? Once. I said. The horn bleated. She laughed from somewhere unbroken. We made rituals because rituals grow roots. Delivery mornings burnt coffee on purpose. tiny budgets on invoice backs, serial spirals that made me late. She drew trucks with eyelashes and stuck them to the fridge with a red apple magnet that chipped and never sat straight. Each time I reached to fix it, I remembered her practiced shrug. Thanksgiving at Aunt Lorraine's house taught me how sugared whispers rot. Lorraine hugged Ava, kissed the air by my cheek, then lifted an eyebrow at the store-bought pumpkin pie. Pumpkin is pumpkin, I said. She kneeled to Ava's height and lowered her voice. One day, you'll have the nice things your mother keeps tucked away. You deserve them. Ava's head tilted. I set the pie down and felt something bloom under my ribs. Seeds like that don't need watering. High school came fast. Costs I hadn't planned smacked every list. Ava fell for a green satin prom dress. It's too much, I said. Reflex. It's my one thing, she said. I sold my car. On prom night. The kettle screamed as she clattered down the steps, and I let it scream longer than usual. College brochures promised futures. Ava did 2 semesters and came home. Professors are fake. Money is real. Save, I said. She nodded while scrolling apartments with beige carpet. Our arguments became pauses. You make decisions and call them secrets, she said. I share what matters, I said. The rest I keep safe. Sunridge formed like frost. One plain line branching into strength. I added a second truck. Then a third. I signed fewer documents in public and more behind shut doors. Strategy. The world hears a woman differently when her name is on many checks. I kept the kitchen the same. I kept the kettle. I kept the crooked apple magnet. Privacy was a lock. A banker sold me on 2-factor authentication. We text your phone a code. No code. No access. She slid a brochure across the counter. I tucked it into my notebook and promised I'd read it later. Later arrived as a carrier alert about a line transfer I hadn't requested. Ava met Derek on a rooftop patio. He sold homes. Or said so. He shook my hand with a grip practiced in mirrors and called me Ms. Sloan until I said Maggie was fine. Then tried Mom. He joked about shortcuts. I boiled water to give my hands a chore. The kettle filled the quiet. They married. I mortgaged my house to give them the reception they wanted. At the dance, Ava pressed her forehead to mine. Breath sweet with champagne. You always come through, she said. I kept my answer to myself. The first time she looked at me like a creditor instead of a mother. July heat made the driveway wobble. Just admit it, she said. You've always had more than you showed. I've had what I earned, I said. Which is more than this, she said, waving at chipped steps and the immortal kettle. You played poor. I played safe, I said. A few days later, my phone hiccuped a carrier alert. Brief outage. Restart recommended. I did. A shopping app asked for a password. I didn't know something had already moved without my permission. And the old window wasn't as locked as I believed. Those years were lean and sometimes generous. On class nights, I left dinners in the freezer and a note on the counter. Back by 10. Text if you need me. On Saturdays, we hunted paperbacks at a thrift shop that smelled like dust and ink. Ava picked covers with girls who saved themselves. I learned routes by heart alleys that stayed plowed. Docks that loaded cleanly. The dispatcher who slipped me an extra run if I showed up on time. I didn't know it then. But all that mapping would matter later. When I needed to trace where money had gone and who held the keys. Caleb Ortiz came into my life the year I stopped pretending bookkeeping was a side chore and admitted I was building a company. He was a CPA with a JD and a face that never rushed. We met at a coffee shop where the tables rocked on bad legs. He balanced his with a napkin, then balanced my world with a sentence. Kindness never replaces discipline, he said, sliding my handwritten ledgers back to me. If you won't protect your rules won't protect you. I wrote that line on the inside cover of my spiral notebook, and, without meaning to, on the inside of my heart. He taught me to separate accounts like you'd separate wires in a house you don't want to burn down. Operating here. Payroll there. Taxes untouched. He showed me how to lock things that never look like doors. Policies. Permissions. Dual signatures. He didn't say, "Don't tell your daughter." But he did say, "Transparency is not the same as access." I told him about Ava, about what we had survived, about how I wanted everything to feel generous, so she never felt small again. Caleb folded his hands. Generous is not the same as limitless. Sunridge grew in the stubborn way. Colorado weeds do through cracks nobody thought could support life. Contracts moved from single pages to packets. I hired drivers who taught me road slang and how to read a sky. The yard developed its own weather diesel breath. Hot rubber. The metallic song of ratchet straps. I stopped wearing the same cardigan to every meeting. I bought a black blazer that made people wait half a second before underestimating me. I learned how far to lean across a table and when to say, "We'll get back to you," even when we needed the job more than they needed us. At home, I kept everything the same: the kettle, the crooked magnet, the couch that still preferred the shape of a child, because constancy can be its own kind of mercy. When Ava was 21, she wanted out of the apartment with the beige carpet and into a downtown place where the elevators smelled like cologne. "It's not that much more," she said, which is a sentence that has ruined more budgets than greed ever did. I ran the math out loud because I wanted her to see it move across the air. Rent, utilities, commuting, savings. I offered to match what she put away for 6 months. She agreed, then bought a couch on credit because the showroom light made everything look free. I covered the late fee the first time because I told myself I was paying for the lesson. I covered it the second time because lessons don't always take. On the third time, I sent a screenshot of her own numbers back to her and waited. She didn't reply for 2 days. When she did, it was a thumbs up, the digital equivalent of a door half closed. Derek started appearing in our story like a watermark you only see at certain angles. He had a story for every question and a solution for every problem that involved someone else's risk. He liked to say, "It's who you know," while scrolling, as if people were buttons he could press. When he proposed, I hugged him and kept my thoughts to myself because nobody wants a mother's weather at their engagement party. I met his fixer friend Rick Stanton at a barbecue where the ribs were perfect and the conversations were not. Rick wore a watch big enough to count as a weapon and repeated every name 3 times as if he were making a spell. "Maggie. Maggie. Maggie." He smiled like a loan shark who tithes. I rinsed my plate in the kitchen and stared out the window at a backyard that wasn't mine. A wind chime clinked like glass teeth. Ava and Derek wanted Willow Creek Estates because the model home smelled like cinnamon and possibility. The saleswoman waved through numbers like she was fanning herself. "With the right creative package," she said, and looked at Derek. He looked at me. "Mom, this is it. This is the start." He said start like a finish line. I felt every year of my life put its hand on my shoulder. "What's your down payment?" I asked. And the silence that followed was a language I already spoke. I didn't co-sign. I did something worse. I bought time. I paid off 2 of Ava's smaller debts, so the credit report would stop blinking red long enough for Derek to work his contacts. I told myself it was a one-time intervention. Kindness, Caleb would say later, needs a thermostat. The wedding was a bouquet of compromises bound together with hope. I mortgaged my house because I wanted her to feel celebrated, the way I'd promised her on nights she crawled into my bed to escape nightmares. Aunt Lorraine cried at the ceremony. Fat, happy tears that camera lenses love. "See?" she whispered to Ava when I couldn't hear, but later would imagine. "Your mother had it all along." The kettle screamed in my head, though we were in a rented hall with champagne and a DJ who loved Motown more than the bride did. Ava pressed her forehead to mine and said, "You always come through." I nodded as if that sentence weren't a rope. After the honeymoon, the calls started to sound like invoices with small talk draped over them. Car insurance got weirdly expensive. The landlord miscounted. Derek's commission would hit next cycle. For real. I sent money once. Then twice. After the third time, I wrote a budget on a napkin and slid it across a diner table sticky with syrup. "If you follow this for 3 months," I said, "I'll match your emergency fund." Derek smiled, grateful in a way that made me check my purse. Ava said thank you and folded the napkin so cleanly it looked like origami. They called less for a while. which felt like progress until I learned silence can also be the sound of plotting. At Sunridge, I installed more locks that didn't look like locks. Jenna, my operations assistant, implemented step-up verification, dual approvals, device whitelisting. I kept my phone number like it was a gate code only I knew. A carrier email landed one Tuesday, minor system maintenance. No action needed. I deleted it. The following week, a signal hiccup dropped a call with Caleb. "You're breaking up," he said. "Say it again. We'll need a clean paper trail for the new client." I said when the line caught. "Always," he said. And Maggie, remember the sentence. "Kindness never replaces discipline." I said, and he laughed the way good men laugh when they know the truth has already cost you. Ava's mood shifted that summer. She started coming by in dresses that announced a life one bracket up. Perfume I couldn't name. Shoes that made her move like a newscaster. "We're just leveling up," she said when I asked about the spending. "You taught me to think bigger. I taught you to balance." I said, "It's the same," she said. I watched her eyes while she said it and saw where the sentence bent. Lorraine took her to lunch and called me afterward. "She's a Sloan," Lorraine said. "Like a diagnosis. Ambition runs in the blood. Ambition runs on budgets." I said. Lorraine laughed into the mouthpiece and told me to get some rest. The first sign I missed wasn't a sign. It was the absence of one. Ava stopped asking to borrow my car. Derek stopped asking me to look at listings. They stopped asking me anything and replaced the questions with updates I couldn't verify. "We found a guy," Derek said. "He knows how to structure things so banks see what they need." I put down the phone and laid my palm flat on the table to stop it from shaking. The Apple magnet slid a fraction on the fridge. I straightened it and thought about windows. One afternoon in September, the yard was loud enough to drown thought backs of trailers slammed. A driver laughing too hard at his own joke. Radio static. Jenna came in with printouts and a face like bad weather. "Weird pings," she said. "Failed logins from unfamiliar IPs. Then successful ones. Short sessions. We changed passwords and swept devices." I called the carrier and listened to hold music that sounded like someone imitating reassurance. "Everything looks normal on our end." The rep chirped. I wanted to ask which end that was because from where I stood, the ground had begun to tilt. I went home and made coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. The kettle's scream felt longer. Or maybe I was the one stretching. When it clicked off, the silence had a thickness to it, like air before hail. Ava texted a selfie. Sun in her hair. A caption that read, "New beginnings." I typed, "Proud of you," and didn't hit send. I set the phone down face up and watched the screen sleep. I thought about Ava at 3, asking whether the window was locked. I thought about the banker's brochure with its cheerful icons. I thought about the sentence that made people accuse me of coldness, even as it kept our lights on. Kindness never replaces discipline. I wish I could say I saw it coming. I didn't. What I saw was the shape of my life. Each careful choice like a brick. And I believed a house built brick by brick could not be taken in a night. I believed locks were locks. That a phone in my hand meant my life was in my hand. That daughters, even complicated ones, would step back from ledges you spent years building railings around. Faith, it turns out, is a door thieves prefer because it opens quietly. When the morning finally came, the morning that split my life into before and after, I was not a new woman. I was the same woman with the same kettle and the same notebook and the same soft hope that the world honors effort. And yet, under all that sameness, something had hardened. The way a river under ice is water still, but no longer gives where it used to. I was ready without knowing the word. The first tremor wasn't the missing money. It was smaller. The kind you blame on a semi 2 streets over. Jenna tapped my door with a knuckle that barely touched wood. "Payroll portal shows you logged in from Kansas City," she said. "Sliding printouts like X-rays. 5 minutes. Then out." I was at this desk. I said, "I know," she said. "Which is why I printed it." We forced logouts, rotated passwords, enabled every chain the software offered. I set my phone on the desk, like proximity could be armor. In the break room, the kettle screamed because someone forgot their tea. I clicked my pin and tried to hear the shape of what was coming. By noon, Eddie hovered in my doorway. "Boss, you hear anything about checks?" he asked. Voice low. "My wife keeps stalking the mailbox. You'll be paid." I said. "On time?" He nodded and left. At home, Ava and Derek were on my couch with the glow people wear when they've decided your answer in advance. His laptop blinked real estate tabs. Her smile owned the air. "We put in an offer," Derek said. "Willow Creek. 3-bed. Yard. Perfect schools." "Where'd your down payment come from?" I asked. "Contacts. Creative package," he said. Ava tilted her head. "Mom, we're done with tiny. It's time. It's time when you can afford it." I said. "You can afford it?" She shot back. "Or are we still doing the cardigan act?" I looked at the stuffed rabbit on the shelf. One ear blue-threaded. "I'm not your lender," I said. "You're my mother." She said. "Same thing." Derek tapped the trackpad. "We're moving forward." "Maggie, you should be happy." "Be careful with should," I said. It's how people smuggle shame into a sentence. They left in a gust of perfume and certainty. The house settled the way old wood does when a truck passes. The bank called at 9:03 a.m. "Security check." A woman chirped. "Verifying a wire to Stanton Holding LLC." "Deny," I said. "Freeze the profile. In-branch verification only." Paper shuffled. Cheer thinned. "Noted." I drove to the branch with Jenna's logs. The manager said, "Our systems are robust." I left with pamphlets and a business card that felt like a shrug. Back at the yard, Rosa met me by the dock. "People are nervous," she said. "Rumors." "What are they saying?" "That we're in trouble. That you hid something. That checks bounce easier than balls." She held my gaze. "I told them to get back to work. Tell me I wasn't lying." "You weren't," I said. "Sunridge pays its people. Full stop." That night, the kitchen light felt colder. I brewed coffee I didn't need. Ava texted a photo of a red car. "New baby," I typed nice. Erased it. I typed, "Be smart." Erased that too. I let the kettle scream until a neighbor rapped the wall. 2 days later, Derek went live. "Family should support family," he said. "Some folks hoard while they play poor. Sad. Must be nice to be old money." A comment read, "Cut the check." Mom. He didn't use my name. He didn't have to. Aunt Lorraine called. "People are talking," she said. "Let them." I said, "You know how this looks." She said, "All those years of thrift store virtue. I pay for what matters." I said. She laughed. "Stubborn suits you until it doesn't." Jenna's email stacked. Failed authentication. Password reset at 2:13 a.m. Successful login from a coffee shop off Colfax. We drove there. Ordered drinks we didn't want. Watched faces like guilt had to tell. It didn't. We left with a timestamp and the kind of anger that keeps you awake. On Friday, 3 drivers asked for advances. I said yes to 1 and no to 2. Eddie brought me a donut. "For luck," he said. "Luck is for people without plans." I said. Then softened. "Thank you." That night, I folded laundry with the TV off and listened to the house remember me stare groan. Fridge sigh. The window ticking as it cooled. I pictured Ava at 3. Counting locks. I pictured Ava at 27. Counting the ways I'd failed to turn my life into an ATM. The kettle screamed. I didn't stop it until the sound sharpened into courage. I stood very still. On Monday, Jenna brought a printout that looked like a heartbeat spikes. Then a flat line. "Operating account," she said. "Small transfers. Same destination with tiny variations. Stanton Holdings. Stanton Holding. Stanton HH. LLC." She tapped the total. "They're testing the fence." "How much?" I asked. 8,000. In crumbs. Crumbs make loaves. I said, I called Caleb. Papers whispered on his end. Immediate controls. He said, dual signatures over 1,000. Physical tokens. Pull device logs. New phones for you and Jenna. And Maggie, prepare yourself. If it's internal, it will hurt. It's not internal. I said too fast. Then we'll prove it. He said, remember the sentence? Kindness never replaces discipline. I said, by mid-afternoon we were in the conference room with blinds shut. Jenna spread screenshots like crime scene photos. We walked the timeline. SIM swap tells. Coffee shop logins. The near wire to Stanton. 3 dates Ava had dropped off lunch for mom. She hugged Rosa. Waved at Jenna. Left with a candy. On the last visit, the carrier maintenance email hit my inbox. Correlation isn't causation. I told myself. And heard the phrase pretend to be wisdom. Do you want me to call her? Jenna asked. No. I said, we move facts. Not feelings. At 5. An unfamiliar number rang. Ms. Sloan, a voice said. Judith with Willow Creek Estates. Confirming the cashier's check for earnest money. Congratulations to Ava and Derek, welcome to the neighborhood. What bank issued it? I asked. First Frontier. She said, I called First Frontier. We can't discuss client specifics. The rep said, they used my company's account. I said, discuss it. Hold music. A second voice. Ms. Sloan. Please visit a branch. I'm done visiting. I said, freeze anything tied to Sunridge Logistics. Now. Understood. I drove to Ava's building and watched glass doors inhale and exhale strangers. I went up without texting. She opened in a robe. Hair pinned with a gold clip. You can't just show up. She said, I can when my money does. I said, what money? The earnest money. The car. The crumbs. You're paranoid. She said, paranoia pays better than denial. Derek walked out. Still tucking his shirt. We're adults. He said, stop policing. Use my operating account. I said, he blinked. You always said the business was family. I said the company feeds families. I said, not that it was a buffet. Ava tilted her head. You played poor. Mom, you wanted me humble. You can afford to help. I did help, years of it. I said, now you're punishing me for taking what was promised. She said, promised by whom? I asked, by decent parents. Derek said, something in me went still. Pack a bag. I said, you're about to learn what consequences look like. You wouldn't. Ava said, I would. I said, and I will. I stepped into the hall and called Caleb. File it. Emergency TRO. He said, size your warrants. If needed. U.S. Marshals. Ready for the noise. Noise is cheaper than collapse. I said. The next day moved like an action sequence. We swore statements. Attached logs. A judge signed. And paper turned into people in jackets. At Willow Creek. A red car rolled onto a flatbed while a neighbor filmed. A yellow notice went up on a model home door. At Ava's. Marshals knocked. Ma'am. We have a warrant to seize assets purchased with misappropriated funds. Derek tried charm. Then volume. Neither worked. Ava cried. A sound I hadn't heard since childhood. Calls Iletti. Text stacked. Comments under Derek's video flipped. Guess the money wasn't hers. Oof. Awkward. Aunt Lorraine left a voicemail that began. How could you? And ended. Call me. I didn't. Back at the yard. Eddie hugged me quick. Then looked away like privacy was a paycheck. Rosa faced the crew. You've got jobs. The boss has your back. The rest is noise. Jenna set a folder on my desk, a trail clean enough for court. I put my palm on it the way you do a newborn's back. Feeling for breath. That night, I let the kettle scream and didn't fear the sound. It was loud, Neighbors peered. But it was mine. I turned off the burner and listened to a quiet that wasn't empty. The kind that means the next move belongs to you. December in Denver makes marble feel colder. The U.S. District Court atrium held its own weather-wet wool. Copie ozone. The hush of people trying not to breathe too loud. Cameras nested on the steps like patient crows. I wore the black suit. The small pearls. The face that doesn't flinch. When the clerk called our case, I stood. Ava sat at the defense table in a gray suit that didn't fit her life. Her hair lay flat. Even vanity had gone quiet. Derek slid into the second row. Jaw tight. Eyes slippery. Aunt Lorraine kept her mouth small. Her coat a statement in a color called Old Money. I didn't look long at any of them. Familiar faces can drown you. All rise. We rose. Judge Eleanor Whitaker took the bench stern without theatrics. The seal above her made every word heavier. AUSA Nathan Pierce faced the jury, buttoned his jacket, and used a carpenter's voice. This isn't a family misunderstanding, he said. It's embezzlement, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft that endangered real paychecks. A screen woke up behind him. Jenna's flowchart marched across it: dates, times, amounts, destination, names mutating by a letter each time, as if shame could be disguised by spelling. Stanton Holdings. Stanton Holding. Stanton HH. LLC. He clicked again. SIM swap affidavit from the carrier. Coffee shop IP logs off Colfax. The near wire. I stopped mid-flight. $580,000. He said, and let the number sit on the air like a hand on a chest. The defense rose, a young attorney wearing a haircut that wanted to be older. Ms. Sloan grew up in opacity. She believed these funds were promised. This is not a criminal mind. This is a daughter. I felt the jury glance at me without turning their heads. I kept my hands folded in my lap and breathed through my nose. Caleb took the stand first. Right hand. Oath. Quiet authority. He explained operating accounts like plumbing pipes you don't steal from if you want lights and wages to flow. These withdrawals don't match payroll cadence. He said, they match retail hours. The defense tried inheritance. Caleb didn't blink. Inheritance doesn't come from payroll at 1:147 p.m. Jenna followed with printouts and a chin that didn't tremble. Failed 2 FA challenges from unfamiliar IPs. She said. Then brief successful sessions. Transfers to near-identical entities. The defense tried sarcasm. Are you saying Ms. Sloan hacked a bank? Jenna kept her voice even. I'm saying the SIM tied to authentication codes was swapped. If the phone is the key ring, someone made a copy. Rosa walked slow, sat like her knees hurt, and spoke for the people who keep a company breathing. When checks were late, men who don't ask for help asked me if they should look elsewhere. Wives cried in grocery aisles. I told them to hold the line because I believed the boss would fix it. The judge sustained an objection. Trimmed the edge. Left the harm. When it was my turn, the microphone smelled like tin. Pierce measured his questions clean. I told the story in pieces that clicked together: a night key, a rabbit's blue-stitched ear, kettle whistles, diesel mornings, the cheerful 2 FA brochure I trusted too much, the selfie caption: new beginnings, the call from Willow Creek congratulating me on money I never sent. Did you authorize your daughter to access Sunridge's operating account? Pierce asked. No. Did you give her your phone? Your SIM? Your codes? No. Did you intend to buy her a house and a car with corporate funds? No. The defense held up a reception photo, my hand on Ava's cheek. You told her you'd always come through. I did. I said. With love. With boundaries. He waited for me to break. I didn't. In closing, Pierce didn't swell the music. He put Ava's text on the screen. Thanks for the house and the car. Mom. The soft knife of a smiley wink without the graphic. This case is about choices. He said. Repeated. Deliberate choices. The jury left. The room exhaled. I counted imperfections in the courtroom seal instead of watching my daughter's face fracture. They came back fast. The foreperson handed paper to the clerk to the judge. Rustle. Rustle small sounds for a large pivot. On count 1. Embezzlement. Guilty. Count 2. Wire fraud. Guilty. Count 3. Aggravated identity theft. Guilty. Ava folded inward. Shoulders to ribs. Derek's mouth opened. Then remembered whose room this was. Aunt Lorraine stared into the grout. Sentencing spliced to the verdict in memory. Judge Whitaker's cadence didn't gloat. The magnitude here is not just dollars. It is disruption to 20 families and to the integrity of a company built over decades. The court imposes 72 months in federal custody. Restitution, $720,000. A no-contact order post-release. Unless modified by this court. Ava turned. Eyes rimmed red in a face I loved before she could speak. Mom? I lifted a hand not to reject. To hold the air steady. I forgive you. I said, quiet as a prayer. That doesn't change this. The marshals moved with courtesy that still breaks the heart. Handcuffs clicked. Somewhere, a pin fell. Winter rattled at a window no one opens. Pierce stacked his files. Caleb squeezed my shoulder. Jenna didn't smile. She nodded once. A soldier's signal. Rosa left to call the drivers. Work doesn't pause for verdicts. On the steps. Microphones butted like reeds. Statement a reporter asked. I kept my voice low enough to make them lean. Kindness never replaces discipline. I said. Today was discipline. Flashes popped. Derek disappeared into a crowd that suddenly had no room for him. Aunt Lorraine adjusted her coat and looked past me. As if past could erase. I went home. Set water to boil. And let the kettle scream a siren I controlled. Then I turned off the flame and held the quiet. The next move belonged to me. And it wouldn't be loud. It would be meticulous and patient. Like everything I've ever built. They thought they'd gutted me. All they did was hand me my weapon. I didn't celebrate. I audited. The night after sentencing. I spread files across my dining table like a map of a country I intended to patrol. Caleb came over with a thin laptop and a thicker folder. Jenna arrived with a portable drive the size of a matchbox. We didn't toast. We plugged in. Start with flow. Caleb said. Money in. Money out. No opinions. Just paths. The forensic package took form the way a photograph appears in developer faint outlines. Then, dark truths. Every transfer Ava made had a twin shadow on Derek's side. A referral fee here. A consulting invoice there. All roads edging back toward Rick Stanton's shells. Stanton Holdings. Stanton Holding. Stanton HH. LLC. Watching the names mutate by a letter each time felt like tracking a snake through dust. Not proof yet. But a direction. Jenna slid over a second stack. Carrier logs. She said. The day your line hiccuped. A SIM change request hit a kiosk across town. They recorded a driver's license that was almost your face. She zoomed. A woman who could pass for me if you didn't know me. The smile too wide. The hair wrong by a shade. Stanton's fixer has a girlfriend. Jenna said. Works part-time at a salon next door. Coincidence. I said. And heard the word, try to talk me to sleep. Pattern. Caleb said. I opened a banker's box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a binder labeled Sunridge Trust Ethical Clause. My pen had underlined a sentence I barely remembered writing. Upon any beneficiary's commission of financial or moral fraud, disbursements shall suspend and redirect to Sunridge Scholarship Fund for dependents of hourly employees. The clause folded the air around us into a neat square. You built the lock years ago. Caleb said. We just heard the click. We don't announce it. I said. We let it work. I drafted 2 letters. One to the scholarship board, triggering the clause. Another to an AUSA in financial crimes. Not Pierce, someone whose desk didn't touch our case. I included the forensic breadcrumbs vendor names. Timestamps. Invoices with typos that repeated like a stutter. I did not accuse. I asked a question. Would your office advise on whether these patterns merit independent inquiry? Polite is a blade if you sharpen it. Around midnight, I stepped onto the balcony. Penthouse glass breathing back city lights. The front range cut a black line against a colder black sky. I thought about Ava's letter one day. Maybe years from now. Asking for a meeting with a counselor present. I thought about saying yes and meaning it. Forgiveness, to me, has never meant forgetting. It means living wide awake. Before bed, I set water to boil. The kettle rose to its thin scream. I let it carry a full breath, then turned off the flame. Silence settled like snow soft. Decisive. They believed they had stripped me. But the ledgers say otherwise. I have locks they never saw. I have time. And I have a question moving quietly through federal corridors toward men who mistake charm for cover. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from and share the moment you realized love without boundaries isn't love at all. Your comments help someone else draw a line. Keep a job. Or sleep without fear. If this story stirred something anger, relief, a plan, drop it below. I read them. I answer when I can. And if you know someone who keeps paying other people's debts with their peace, send this to them tonight. We build strength here. One honest story at a time.